Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Substack Live at the Sustainable Media Center. My name is Emma Lemke, and I serve as the Director of Gen Z Advocacy for SMC. And I'm honored to be joined in conversation today with an SMC advisor and CEO and founder of Causeway Impact with Doug Heskey. Doug is the founder and CEO of New Day Impact Investing, a vertically integrated technology-enabled asset manager and registered investment advisor. Under his guidance, New Day supports more than 50 mission-aligned nonprofit partners through its Causeway participatory platform for value-driven investing. Doug has over 3 decades of leadership in wealth management and impact investing, and today Doug has joined the SMC Advisory Board. So we're very, very grateful and thankful to have you on today with us, Doug.
Emma, thank you so much, and great to see you both.
So for today's conversation, we want to talk about all things Causeway impact and just impact investing in general. But before we dive in and talk a little bit deeper about these topics, I always want to give our conversationalists a chance to kind of walk listeners through their story to, know you a little bit better beyond just introductory remarks. So start us out by walking listeners through your early life influences that have shaped your belief in finance as this force for good.
Emma, thank you. And that's such an appropriate question. And it's certainly one that we've been thinking a lot about lately. And I am a native of the East Coast, and I am a third generation family member, a descendant of my great grandfather who traveled through Ellis Island from Hungary pre-World War II. And when he came over here, he set up shop on a farm. And when my grandparents got married, he gifted them a piece of the land and they built a home on it. And when my parents got married, he did the same thing. And so we had this very unusual upbringing, almost like in this old European style where great grandparents lived here, grandparents lived here, and we, with my two brothers and sister and parents, lived next door. But there was something that was remarkable that happened over this period of time because we as a family were building something very, very special. And that was this idea of community, which is something that is unfortunately not as prevalent as it used to be. And we as an organization speak a lot about the importance of community, the importance of family, the importance of responsibility that extends well beyond just being a business professional. But how do you contribute back to those communities in which you're living and operating in and take care of one another? So that's always been my North Star. It's been something that was instilled by my great grandfather and my grandfather as well, who was the president of a community bank back in Connecticut. And as a young man, I would walk around and people oftentimes would come up and ask me whether I was Al Heskey's son. That was my grandfather. And I'd reply, no, that I was his grandson. And that was oftentimes accompanied by a strong handshake, an arm around the shoulder. And there are expressions of gratitude for the work that my grandfather did during some really challenging times. And those were all really, really proud moments and still are. And they're the types of values that we like to instill, certainly in my own children, but also look for that when we're hiring people at Causeway as well.
Absolutely. And for those who, might be hearing about Causeway for the first time, what problems are you trying to solve and how is your approach different from traditional impact investing? And then also alongside that, what inspired you to found Causeway and what gap did you see in impact investing that wasn't really being addressed?
Yeah, those are all great questions, and perhaps it would be appropriate for me to take a step back and talk about sort of the catalyst for the formation of the organization, which has evolved a lot over the last 8, 9 years. So the driving force between the founding of the business was really this idea that we wanted to change what we addressed or saw as fundamental flaws in the traditional impact investing, SRI, ESG investing marketplace. The first was an authenticity problem. So too much greenwashing, social washing, blue washing. The second was an access problem. So too few people having opportunities to align the things that they deeply cared about with their financial and investment strategy, and too few advisors that were actually well equipped to advise their clients on the importance of values-based investing. So we started the organization with this idea that we were going to select a foundational set of impact pillars, which today have evolved into 7. And they are climate action, air quality, water quality, which includes ocean health, biodiversity and conservation or wildlife conservation, regeneration, healthy soil, human equity, and we have just introduced a seventh, which is health and human wellness. And of course, there's an intersection amongst all of those as well. In the first iteration of what was known as New Day, we were delivering a set of thematic investment portfolios to people that wanted to align their financial investment strategy with those portfolios and doing it in as authentic way as we possibly could. One of the things that we've always recognized is that it's really hard to get any kind of meaningful impact by investing in public equity or debt, and that's become increasingly difficult today. So there are a lot of organizations, especially a number of the big corporate organizations, that have backed away from their climate commitments and from DEI commitments and things like that. So it is tough. And as a result of that, we have evolved the organization to a different place and moved a little bit further away from what is traditional asset management and wealth management associated with those impact pillars, and really have thought about what is the build of three intersectional pathways for engagement that we brand as getting informed, getting involved, and getting invested. Informed is about learning and education. Involved is about civic action. How do we get people to actually participate in making all of these changes? And then thirdly, how do we deploy capital in an effective way in public equity and debt, private investment in purposeful businesses, and then philanthropic capital, the charitable contributions that so many people and institutions make that want to understand how that capital is being deployed in an effective way to drive impact.
And you end with this word, impact. So how would you even define impact at Causeway? And is it something that's, measured, felt, or, both?
It is both measured and felt. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because when we think about impact, it's not just about the delivery of metrics that oftentimes when clients see those, it sort of feels like a homework assignment. Like
Mhm.
what we want people to do is really to feel the emotional connection tied to those things that they care about and to understand fully how the dollars that they're deploying across public investing, private investing, and philanthropy are really making a difference towards the causes they're contributing to. And so our definition of impact is a lot different, I think, than a lot of other organizations. And it starts on the public security side by really understanding the nature of the business that companies are running. And we always identify those companies that we select in our portfolios as great companies. And great companies are doing a lot more than just generating extraordinary returns for their shareholders. They're leaving lasting imprints on the communities that they're living and operating in. They're taking great care of their employees. They are taking great care of their suppliers and things like that. And conversely, organizations that are not doing that create what we've always identified as net detractors to company value as well. And so we find impact by selecting those companies by being active advocates for changes in policies and practices at those companies. The next piece of it is really about identifying purposeful businesses that are private, which is where much of the deep impact work occurs, that are very specific to an impact pillar that are really trying to drive change. And then lastly, we work with about 55 nonprofit organizations. Certainly, the Sustainable Media Center is one, and one of our most important ones that I'll share in a moment why. But making sure that the capital that's being allocated is going to those organizations that are doing the work that they and only they can do from a grassroots perspective. So we typically don't work with organizations that are big pass-through organizations where, frankly, there's just too much capital that stays in Washington and New York and not enough out into the field. So coming back to the Sustainable Media Center, and we, of course, have talked about this before, that everything that we do as an organization has to be grounded in this notion of truth. We make investment decisions that are based on fact. And when you are working with organizations, or even when you're allocating capital to specific countries, you have to have a reasonable understanding that that data is factual as well. So the place that we have evolved to today is that historically we have worked with a lot of high net worth individuals and family offices, but on a go forward basis. And this was really born out of the frustration that we were feeling that just working with high net worth individuals doesn't drive the level of impact that we want to see. We said, well, what about if we were to create a platform that took all of those things that we've done for affluent individuals and put it in the hands of virtually everybody else anywhere else in the world?
Mhm.
And that's what has become Causeway Impact. So the the organization has shifted in its focus away from what is pure asset management into an organization that is adopting these three pathways for driving engagement. And the whole purpose behind that is really trying to take people through what is this opportunity to learn and get educated around the impact initiatives to this level of emotional connectivity with the things they care about. And
Mhm.
then lastly, participation. So, how do they participate? They volunteer, they learn, they share their missions with others, and they deploy capital across those three sectors in a unified way so that they don't operate in conflict with each other.
Mhm.
Question. Uh, when we talk about social media and society, um, I know that you have three very personal reasons why this matters to you, and as well as a lot of others. Talk a little bit about your sons and how different your relationship is to social media to theirs.
There's so much that I can say about this because I have, as you pointed out, Stephen, I have three sons that are all very, very special people. Of course, any father would say that, right? But they've accomplished a lot in their short lives right now. And every one of them has a little bit of a different relationship or has had a different relationship with social media. My oldest is now working for an environmental services organization. He was working in New York City for a year. Um, it was interesting because earlier this year he made the very deliberate decision to stay off social media for an extended period of time, which I was really proud of the fact that he did that. My second son is in the sports media business. He's finishing up college and he has a social media site on almost every network. So he is posting, sports films and things like that in a prolific way. And so he's operating very differently. My youngest son, who is still in high school, and I watch his posts, I see them every day. And he's one of those typical teenagers. He's a little bit older than that right now because he's almost on his way to college, but he has that type of relationship whereby he's connecting with his friends and his family through social media. It's been a really interesting journey, and I'll share one story with you that it was a number of years ago that my middle son, much younger at the time, and it was post the very tragic event that had occurred in Las Vegas with the Mandalay Bay shooting. And it was late one evening, and I walked past his room and I heard him crying in his room. And I paused. I was curious about what was going on. I went in there, I asked him to get up and come out of bed, and we sat down in the other room to talk about it. And he was expressing his feelings that he was very worried that something would happen to his family, similar to what happened at Mandalay Bay. And he was absorbing this information through what he was seeing on the internet. And I grew up in an environment, likely you did too, Stephen, whereby you were getting your news and information maybe once or twice a day, but it wasn't in your face all day long. And when that happens, it has this ability to significantly impact in a negative way your psyche, right? And, I was the kid that grew up and I wasn't allowed to watch Batman because it was too violent, right? And now, you know, God forbid that my mom would ever see any of this stuff because she would be appalled. So there's some really, really important lessons. It is why we're doing the work that we're doing with the Sustainable Media Center, because like you, we believe that the construct for all of this needs to be rethought and redesigned.
Part of what I think about a lot in terms of Causeway and the wider space of social media is how did we get to this place where not only do these handful of companies not think about the ethical responsibility of what they do, but they almost seem to have developed a philosophy that says if it makes money for our shareholders, it is by definition ethical. Like that's our mission in the world. And if selling, hate or misinformation or anger is profitable, we have to. I kind of feel like what Meta says is we have to do that. We have a
Yeah.
shareholder responsibility. What would you say back to that?
So there are a lot of critics around the world of capitalism, and I'm not one of them. I think that capitalism, if used appropriately, can be highly effective in building greatness in countries and societies and things like that. And it's not so much that capitalism is bad, but it's the way that we use it. And it has been sort of the nature of capitalism over many, many years to evolve. I mean, we went from this place whereby we had colonial capitalism, industrial capitalism, and during the 80s and part of the 90s, the preeminent thought in business school was to teach shareholder capitalism. Primary objective is to take care of shareholders and to drive returns. And that philosophy still exists pervasively across corporate America and really the corporate world more globally. And the challenge that we have today, where we have such massive disparity in wealth and fracture in our community and society today, is that capital hasn't evolved, or capitalism hasn't evolved with this. And so there is a gentleman that was one of the former ambassadors to the United Nations. His name is George Hara. And he is commonly viewed as the father of public interest capitalism. And public interest capitalism is not too different from what is stakeholder capitalism, where you're giving consideration to others, rather others above and beyond, but also including your shareholders. And the other thing that I would share with you is that, and this is something that's quite bothersome today, is that when you have leadership across the world, especially here in the US today, that bends the truth, lies, and takes those myth truths and enrages people about it across social media, then what happens in society is that you have everybody else believe that it may be okay to bend the truth. And whether they're corporate leaders, employees, regardless, it becomes really, really difficult to turn back from that. And we're in, I think, a really dangerous place today, especially if are to continue down this path and driving friction amongst citizens here, that it won't end up in a good place.
Well, I think to, close us out today, Doug, I think we've talked about, the power of the human being and human potential. I know that's one of your pillars is talk about human flourishing. So what has been, let's kind of lean into human storytelling. What
Mhm.
has been a meaningful experience that you've had thus far at Causeway and what makes you most proud of that work? Tell us a story.
Um, there are so many, but I'm gonna share two actually, if that's okay.
Go for it.
And both of them have to do with Jane Goodall. So Jane Goodall was our first partnership. The Jane Goodall Institute was our first partnership at Causeway. And I mean, we feel so incredibly fortunate that number one, that Jane and her organization were a partner of ours, but number two, that they were the first partner of ours because it helped pave the way into earning the respect of a lot of other organizations, a lot of other 501(c)(3)s and nonprofits. And, um, I had the extraordinary good fortune of spending time with Jane over the last number of years before her passing. And I asked her on her 89th birthday when we were sitting down with her in her hotel room what her objective was for the next year. And she shared that she wanted to go out and visit as many red states as possible because she was tired of preaching to the converted. And it was the following year that we hosted a birthday event a couple of days in advance of her actual birthday in Seattle, Washington, for a group of about 30 philanthropists. And Jane sat on a bar stool in the front of the room telling her life story. And you can imagine today how memorable that was for the individuals, the people that were in that room. And they still all talk about it today, about how it's changed their thinking. And when you have an opportunity to spend time with not just a global icon for conservation, but this global icon for hope and humanity, it does change your life. And the second piece of this story is that I was attending the National Book Festival with some very good friends last summer who were down there with friends of theirs from California. And these grandparents of this young girl who was also accompanying them, who was 12 or 13 years old, um, joined us for dinner. So there were the seven of us. And she kept looking across at the table at me. And I was sitting there thinking, what does she keep looking at? You start to get a little uncomfortable. And I was wearing my Jane Goodall sweatshirt. And the conversation quieted down, and she leaned in and said, Mr. Heskey, do you know Jane Goodall? And I, proudly sat up and I said, yes, I do. And she got up from the table and came over and sat down next to me and spent the next 30 minutes telling her story about how Jane was her model, her mentor, and all of the reasons why. And I said, tell you what, I said, if you draft a letter to Jane, I'll make sure that she gets it. And so we got the letter to Jane, and um, and Jane passed not long after that, but she did get the letter, and we were able to just this last month deliver what was a signed book to her from Jane and all of this other memorabilia from the Institute. And she sent me a letter, as did her grandmother. And the letter, I wish I had it in front of me here, is something I will never ever forget. She was talking about how important it was for her that somebody listened to her and heard her story, even the story from a 12-year-old, and they did something about it. And what I didn't know at the time that I had met Bella is that she had had this really, really challenging childhood. And she was spending time with her dad, and her dad was passing away from cancer. And she was administering cancer treatments to him later in life. And it just broke my heart when I heard that. And thinking about how any 12-year-old should have to have that kind of experience. And um, it's, I think, a really important lesson for all of us to pay attention, because there are times that people are introduced to you in your life and you look the other way, or you're too busy, and you say, yeah, I'm going to get to that, and it goes into the to-do stack, and then by the end of the month, it's in the bottom of the stack, and you say, well, it's too late to do anything about that. So there are a lot of people that we work with that are doing extraordinary things in the world. Emma and Steve, you were two of them. I mean, I share the story all the time, and I say that Emma is this young woman who has leapt onto the national stage as a really powerful advocate for the redesign of social media in a responsible way, and has done TED Talks and testified in front of Congress and all. And we're very, very proud of the work that you, Emma, do, and Steve, you as well.
That was a completely unsolicited endorsement. Thank you very much. It was great. It was great being with you today. It was really good. Thank you.
This is a lot of fun. Thank you. Great to see you both.
Great.